chill of the Pacific Northwest always clung to me, a damp embrace that seeped into bones and memory. But no cold was quite like the one that settled deep in my soul after that expedition. A profound and unsettling chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. It was a cold born of revelation, of understanding something so fundamentally disturbing about our own species that it shattered every preconception I held. That forest, those towering, silent sentinels of ancient wood, became the canvas for a truth I never sought, a truth unveiled by the very mystery I chased, a creature whispered about in hushed tones, Bigfoot. It showed me what humans did to its family, and I swear, I'll never see our species the same way again. The world shifted on its axis that day, and I was left staring into an abyss of human nature I hadn't known existed. My name is Elias. For years, I've been a ghost in the wilderness, a phantom among the shadows, driven by an insatiable hunger for the unknown. My camera, a silent extension of my will, has captured the fleeting beauty of rare wildlife. But my true passion, my obsession, lay in the realm of cryptids. The subtle rustle in the undergrowth that wasn't quite a bear, the distant vocalization that resonated with an eerie intelligence, the snapped branches too high for any man to reach. These were the breadcrumbs that led me deeper into the legend of Bigfoot. I wasn't just a photographer, I was a seeker of truth, convinced that science had simply overlooked a profound branch on the tree of life. My home, if you could call it that, was a secluded cabin nestled deep within the Olympic National Forest, a place synonymous with Sasquatch sightings, a veritable heartland for the elusive giants. It was a rustic sanctuary, powered by solar panels and a persistent dream, surrounded by a wilderness that whispered secrets to those patient enough to listen. Every creak of the old timber, every sigh of the wind through the colossal firs was a potential clue, a fragment of a larger puzzle. I had spent countless seasons tracking, observing, and documenting, not just with traditional cameras, but with an array of sophisticated thermal imagers, seismic sensors, and acoustic detectors. My equipment was cutting edge, modified for extreme conditions and designed to pick up anomalies that the human eye and ear might miss. Most of my work yielded tantalizing but ultimately inconclusive evidence. Grainy images, unidentifiable vocal prints, massive footprints that defied conventional animal identification. The scientific community, predictably, scoffed, but I knew. I felt it in my gut, in the core of my being, that something extraordinary inhabited these woods. Something intelligent and ancient. Then came the signal. It wasn't like anything I'd ever detected before. A faint, almost rhythmic energy signature, far too complex to be geological, too structured to be purely animalistic in the way we understand it. It flickered on my custom-built spectral analyzer, a ghostly green line dancing across the screen, originating from a quadrant of the forest so remote, so utterly untouched, that even seasoned loggers avoided it. It was beyond the farthest reaches of any established trail, a true wilderness, a place where maps gave way to speculation, and the trees themselves seemed to guard ancient secrets. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to investigate. This wasn't just another expedition. This was different. This was a call, a summons from the very heart of the mystery. My heart pounded with a mixture of terror and exhilarating anticipation. This signal was the siren song of destiny, luring me into the unknown. I packed my heaviest gear, double-checked my provisions, and prepared for a journey deeper into the vast, silent expanse than I had ever dared, into a place where the lines between myth and reality would blur irrevocably. My scientific detachment, the cold objectivity I prided myself on, was already beginning to fray around the edges, replaced by a visceral excitement. This was it. This was the one. As I shouldered my pack, the crisp morning air bit at my exposed skin, but I hardly noticed. My mind was consumed by the green flicker on my analyzer. It pulsed with a quiet insistence, a promise of revelation. The trail, soon to vanish altogether, stretched before me like a beckoning finger, leading me towards an encounter that would redefine not just my understanding of Bigfoot, but of humanity itself. If this story has piqued your curiosity, if you find yourself wondering what secrets the deep woods hold, and what profound, disturbing truths were unveiled, then I urge you to become a part of this journey. Subscribe to the channel right now. Hit the notification bell, because this is just the beginning. There's so much more to uncover, so much more to tell about the chilling lessons I learned. Lessons that reshaped my entire worldview. You won't want to miss a single shocking detail as this incredible, heartbreaking, and ultimately transformative story unfolds. What I witnessed, what I was shown, will stay with me forever, and I promise it will stay with you too. The strange, almost rhythmic pulse Elias had detected on his equipment grew stronger, urging him deeper into the verdant labyrinth of the Pacific Northwest. He adjusted the straps of his heavy pack. The familiar weight of his cameras, lenses, and scientific instruments, a comforting presence against the unsettling wildness that now seemed to press in from all sides. He'd navigated countless miles of untouched wilderness, yet this felt different. The air itself seemed charged with an unseen energy, a silent hum that vibrated just beneath the threshold of hearing, a sensation that prickled the hairs on his arms. As he pushed through a thicket of ancient ferns, he noticed the first truly aberrant sign. A massive Douglas fir, easily 300 years old, lay snapped cleanly in half, its top section hurled 20 feet away as if by some colossal, unseen hand. The break wasn't from a storm. The edges were too jagged, too fresh, resembling a clean, powerful twist. He'd seen bear damage, even the destructive path of a determined rutting elk. But this was on another scale entirely. It spoke of immense raw power, far beyond any known creature native to these forests. A shiver traced its way down his spine, a primal warning his scientific mind struggled to rationalize. He continued, his steps now more cautious, his eyes scanning the dense undergrowth, not just for interesting flora or faint trails, but for the source of this unsettling disturbance. Further on, he found a succession of similar anomalies. Small trees uprooted, large rocks seemingly displaced from their beds, and an unnerving lack of smaller wildlife. The usual chattering of squirrels, the rustle of unseen creatures, the vibrant birdsong that typically filled these woods, all were eerily absent. A heavy silence had descended, broken only by the crunch of his boots on the forest floor and the insistent, almost mocking chirping of his signal tracker. Then came the sounds. Not the calls of known animals, but deep-throated guttural vocalizations, sometimes distant, sometimes alarmingly close, that seemed to reverberate through his very bones. They weren't aggressive, not exactly, but they carried an undeniable message of territoriality, a warning. They pulsed with a raw, untamed intelligence that bypassed his logical brain and spoke directly to something ancient within him. His scientific detachment, his carefully cultivated objectivity, began to fray at the edges, replaced by a growing tide of primal fear. This wasn't just a cryptid he was tracking. It was a presence, a force. One afternoon, while setting up a remote camera trap near a particularly potent signal hotspot, he felt it distinctly. the overwhelming sensation of being watched. It wasn't the fleeting sense one gets from a curious deer. This was sustained, intense, and intelligent. He spun around, his hand instinctively going to the small but powerful pepper spray holstered on his hip, a relic from a past, more naive expedition. Nothing. Just the endless, indifferent green of the forest. Yet the feeling persisted, a cold, focused gaze that seemed to pierce through the thick canopy and settle directly on him. He hurried his work, the feeling making his fingers clumsy. The antagonist wasn't a growling beast or a predatory shadow, but the escalating, unsettling evidence of a powerful, intelligent entity that seemed to be warning him away. Subtly, at first, with the snapped trees and the eerie silence. Then less subtly, with the deep, resonant vocalizations that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere, and the palpable sense of an unseen observer. Elias, ever the scientist, tried to interpret these signs, to rationalize them, but a cold dread began to seep into his core. This wasn't a creature to be documented from afar. This was something that knew he was there, and it was making its presence felt. He decided a change of approach was needed. Confrontation, or even direct pursuit, seemed unwise, given the sheer power suggested by the broken trees. His goal had always been contact, understanding, not capture or disturbance. He began leaving offerings, small, non-threatening gestures, a handful of dried fruit and nuts, carefully placed on a mossy log, a shiny polished stone, a small, intricately carved wooden bird. He positioned a motion-activated camera near each offering, hoping to capture a glimpse of whatever might take them. His attempts were met with curious, unsettling rejections. The fruit and nuts would be gone, but not consumed. He'd find them scattered, sometimes neatly piled into an odd, geometric pattern a few feet away, sometimes tossed into a nearby stream. The polished stone would be moved, often placed atop another larger stone, in a peculiar cairn-like arrangement. The wooden bird, a piece he'd meticulously crafted himself, appeared one morning hanging delicately from a branch by a strand of tough, fibrous vine, high above where he'd left it. It was as if his offerings were being examined, understood, and then returned, not in anger, but with a clear, unspoken dismissal. Each rejection, each rearrangement of his gestures, only deepened the mystery and heightened his awareness of the intelligence he was dealing with. This wasn't a simple animal taking food. This was a being that processed his actions, that understood the concept of an offering, and chose to respond in its own enigmatic way. The subtle messages were clear. We see your gifts, but we do not need them, nor do we welcome them in the way you intend. The feeling of being watched intensified, now carrying a hint of appraisal, perhaps even a challenge. Elias realized he was engaged in a silent dialogue, a wordless negotiation with an entity whose rules he was only just beginning to comprehend, and whose power was far greater than he had ever anticipated. His scientific expedition had inadvertently become a journey into the unknown depths of an intelligent, unseen world. The forest seemed to breathe with a new, unsettling depth, its silence no longer peaceful, but charged with an unseen presence. Elias felt it, a constant prickling awareness that transcended mere animal instinct. Objects began to subtly shift, seemingly of their own accord. A carefully placed rock cairn would be gently toppled, its stones rearranged into a new, unintelligible pattern. His spare canteen, left hanging from a low branch, once returned to retrieve, would be found resting on the ground, precisely centered on a patch of moss. These were not the random acts of curious critters. There was an intelligence at play, a deliberate, almost playful manipulation of his immediate environment. He'd turn his back for a moment, perhaps to consult a map or adjust a camera lens, and a chill would trace his spine, the unmistakable sensation of breath on his neck, cold and earthy, only to vanish the instant he spun around, revealing nothing but the dense, indifferent foliage. The fleeting glimpses began to escalate, too. At first, they were just blurs, peripheral suggestions of immense mass and dark fur disappearing behind ancient trees. A powerful, muscled leg, thick as a human torso, vanishing into the shadows. A broad, furred shoulder momentarily eclipsing a shaft of sunlight before melting back into the deep green. These were not tricks of light or overactive imagination. Elias, with his years of honing observational skills, knew what he was seeing, or rather, what he was almost seeing. The creatures, for he was now certain there were more than one, were master illusionists, moving with an impossible grace and stealth for their size, always just beyond the definitive focus of his high-resolution lenses. His camp became a stage for their invisible theater, his every move observed, analyzed, perhaps even silently judged. One evening, as dusk was bleeding purple into the sky, painting the towering pines with somber hues, Elias had retreated into the relative sanctuary of his tent. He was meticulously cleaning his primary camera, the soft clicks of the lens a rhythmic counterpoint to the chirping crickets outside. A faint rustling, closer than he liked, made him pause. He froze, listening. His breath caught in his throat. The sound intensified. A soft, deliberate pressure against the nylon fabric of his tent, right beside his head. It wasn't aggressive, not violent, but undeniably there. A tangible weight, then, a moment later, just as quickly as it had appeared, the pressure receded. He waited, heart hammering against his ribs, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, slowly, Elias unzipped the tent flap and peered out. The air was still, the forest silent once more, save for the distant hoot of an owl. He scanned the immediate area, his powerful headlamp cutting through the gloom. There, imprinted clearly in the soft, damp earth, just centimeters from his tent wall, was an enormous handprint. It was massive, far larger than any human hand, with thick, powerful fingers and a broad palm. What truly struck him, however, were the faint but discernible scars etched into the leathery skin, tiny ridges that spoke of ancient wounds and a life lived harshly. This wasn't merely an animal print, it was an imprint of tangible existence, of a creature with history, with intelligence. It was a silent, undeniable confirmation. These beings were real, and they were, indeed, watching him. This was not just an animal, it was something more, something profoundly intelligent and powerful, capable of deliberately leaving such a clear, resonant message. The next morning, the veil of mystery began to lift, replaced by an even more profound sense of wonder. Elias awoke to find a peculiar arrangement laid out meticulously on the flattened moss just outside his tent. It wasn't a random scattering of forest debris. Several smooth gray river stones had been placed in a precise spiral, radiating outwards from a central, larger, dark stone. Intertwined within, the stones were slender, pliable twigs, bent and woven into intricate knots and loops, forming patterns he couldn't immediately decipher, but intensely recognized as deliberate. This was not the chaotic work of nature, or the idle play of a wild animal. This was communication. This was art, born of intention, laid out with purpose. He spent hours studying the arrangement, his scientific mind grappling with the sudden shift from observation to potential interaction. The spiral, the knots, the choice of materials. They all spoke of a design, a language. It was a silent conversation, a first tentative whisper across the species barrier, and Elias, with his decades of seeking the unknown, felt an almost overwhelming surge of awe and possibility. He recognized it instinctively as a message, a deliberate invitation to a different kind of understanding. The fear that had been gnawing at him began to recede, replaced by an insatiable curiosity and a budding sense of respect. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this moment marked a profound turning point in his expedition, and indeed, in his entire life, purpose. The woods held secrets far deeper than he had ever dared to imagine. Elias's hands trembled slightly as he began to respond to the silent invitation. He spent the remainder of that day not tracking, but learning, observing every detail of the stone and twig arrangement. He noticed the direction of the spiraling leaves, the careful intertwining of the branches, the specific types of stones chosen. His mind, usually analytical and focused on quantifiable data, was now engaged in a different kind of deciphering, one rooted in intuition and respect. He decided his response needed to be equally deliberate, equally respectful. He gathered his own selection of smooth stones from a nearby stream, choosing colors and shapes that seemed to resonate with the original display. He collected delicate ferns and pliable shoots, carefully mimicking the weaving techniques he had observed. It was slow, painstaking work, an act of profound humility. He created his own arrangement, a smaller, simpler one, placed a respectful distance from the first, hoping it conveyed a message of peace and understanding. He returned to his tent, consumed by a mixture of anxiety and eager anticipation, wondering if his attempt at communication had been received, let alone understood. The following morning, the forest air felt different, charged with an almost palpable energy. Elias emerged from his tent to find his own arrangement undisturbed, but the original display had subtly changed. A single, large, dark feather, one he recognized as belonging to a raven, had been placed precisely in the center of the stone spiral. It wasn't merely dropped there. It was nestled, almost reverently. This was an acknowledgement, a continuation of the dialogue. Elias felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed by an intense surge of excitement. They were communicating. Slowly, cautiously. Over the next few days, this silent ritual continued. Elias would make a small addition or alteration to his own display, always respectful, always careful not to disturb their original message. Each time, by morning, their arrangement would have a subtle, deliberate change, a new stone, a twisted vine, a carefully placed seed pod. It was like learning a new language, one of earth and leaf and air, where every element held significance. He was building trust, one careful, silent gesture at a time, stepping into a world he had only ever dreamed of accessing. Then came the day that transcended all his expectations. He had just placed a small, polished piece of petrified wood next to his arrangement, a gesture he hoped conveyed ancient wisdom and enduring presence. As he straightened up, a flicker of movement caught his eye, deep within the shadows of the ancient cedars. He froze, barely daring to breathe. Slowly, majestically, a massive dark form emerged from the dappled light. It was enormous, covered in thick dark fur that seemed to absorb the light. This was it. The Bigfoot. But it wasn't alone. Trailing slightly behind, cautiously peeking from behind the adult's immense leg, were two smaller figures. Juveniles. A family. Elias's camera, usually an extension of his arm, remained forgotten by his side. This was not a moment for capturing. It was a moment for experiencing. The sheer scale of the adult was breathtaking, its gaze intense, intelligent, yet devoid of menace. The smaller ones, perhaps observing his reaction, mirrored the adult's cautious curiosity. He could discern their features now: broad shoulders, powerful limbs, eyes that held an uncanny depth. A profound sense of privilege washed over him, a feeling so intense it brought tears to his eyes. He was witnessing not just a cryptid, a legend, but a living, breathing family, existing in quiet harmony within a world that refused to acknowledge them. The initial fear that had once gripped him had entirely dissolved, replaced by a profound awe and an almost spiritual connection to the moment. He felt like he had been granted access to a secret chamber of the earth, a sacred space. The adult Bigfoot, which Elias now instinctively regarded as the elder, made no sound, but its actions spoke volumes. It turned its head slowly, its dark eyes meeting Elias's, then pivoted majestically and began to move deeper into the forest, its powerful strides surprisingly graceful. The two smaller figures followed, their movements an echo of the elders. Elias understood. This was not a retreat, it was an invitation. He hesitated for only a second, then picked up his gear, a newfound reverence guiding his every step. He followed, maintaining a respectful distance, his senses heightened, every fiber of his being attuned to the forest around him. The elder led him on a meandering path through dense undergrowth and over moss-covered logs, always with a silent awareness of his presence behind them. They moved with an intimate knowledge of the terrain, weaving through the ancient trees as if they were part of the very fabric of the forest. Soon, Elias noticed a subtle shift in the landscape. The trees grew even older, their trunks thicker, their canopies forming a denser, cathedral-like ceiling. There was a faint, almost imperceptible change in the air pressure, a sense of entering a contained, unique environment. He realized he was crossing an invisible threshold, a natural boundary he had never before been aware of, even with all his years of exploration. It was a place where the forest itself seemed to hold its breath, a hidden sanctuary, protected by its very remoteness and the silent guardians who called it home. The elder Bigfoot paused at the edge of this newly revealed space, turning once more to look at Elias, a silent assurance in its gaze. The invitation was clear. He was being asked to step into their world, to see what few, if any, humans had ever been permitted to witness. With a deep breath, Elias followed them, venturing into the unknown, his heart full of a hopeful, exhilarating dread. The unspoken invitation, delivered through the intricate arrangement of stones and twigs, resonated deeply within Elias. He recognized it for what it was, a pivotal moment, a chance to step beyond the boundaries of his scientific understanding and enter a realm previously thought impossible. He spent a full day replicating the patterns, using his own collection of smooth river stones and pliable branches, laying them out carefully in response, hoping his effort conveyed respect and a desire for continued dialogue. He didn't know if his mimicry was understood, but the following morning, the original arrangement was gone, replaced by a single, perfectly balanced stack of 3 flat stones on his tense entrance flap, pointing distinctly deeper into the ancient forest. It was an undeniable beacon, a clear directive. Elias packed only the essentials: water, high-energy rations, his most unobtrusive camera equipment, and a small, powerful field recorder. He left his rifle behind, a conscious decision to signal trust, a departure from his usual preparedness. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, and the forest floor was a tapestry of moss and fallen leaves as he began his trek, following the silent guide. The path wasn't marked by broken branches or footprints, but by subtle cues only perceptible to a seasoned woodsman. A slightly disturbed patch of lichen, a recently overturned stone, the way certain ferns seemed to be gently pressed down in a specific direction. It was an almost invisible trail, designed for eyes that understood the language of the wilderness itself. Hours passed in quiet reverence. The forest grew denser, the trees taller, their canopies forming a cathedral of dappled light. He felt a profound shift in the atmosphere, a sense of entering sacred ground, a place untouched by human hands. The usual cacophony of forest sounds lessened, replaced by a deep, resonant hum, as if the very earth was breathing. Then, through a final curtain of ancient hemlocks, he stepped into a clearing, a hidden glade bathed in soft, ethereal light. It was breathtaking, a natural sanctuary where time seemed to stand still. And there they were, not one, but a small community. 2 adults, one unmistakably the elder he had been communicating with, sat observing him from beneath the protective branches of an enormous redwood. Near them, a juvenile, smaller than the 2 he had glimpsed before, played amongst the moss-covered roots, mimicking the foraging movements of its elders. A second, even younger, Sasquatch nestled against the side of one of the adults, barely visible, a tiny, furry bundle. The scene was one of profound peace, a tableau of ancient wisdom and harmonious existence. Elias felt an overwhelming rush of emotions: awe, humility, a deep sense of privilege. This was not a myth, not a cryptid, but a living, breathing, intelligent family, existing in profound harmony with their environment. Their eyes, dark and intelligent, held no malice, only a deep, ancient curiosity. The elder, with a gentle, deliberate movement of its massive hand, gestured towards a massive granite outcropping at the far end of the glade. Elias moved slowly, respectfully, his camera forgotten for the moment, his entire being focused on the profound significance of this interaction. As he approached the rock face, a chilling sense of dread began to mingle with his awe. The surface of the stone was not naturally smooth. It was covered in carvings, crude yet unmistakable, etched deep into the ancient rock. They weren't mere scratches or random markings. They were a vivid, silent narrative. The initial carvings depicted scenes of idyllic Bigfoot life, figures foraging for berries, gathering roots, frolicking in what appeared to be lush, untouched forests. There were depictions of juveniles playing, adults teaching, families huddled together in what looked like shelters. A deep sense of community, of shared existence, emanated from these primal etchings. Elias could almost hear the rustling of leaves, the gentle cooing sounds of the young, the quiet rhythm of their days. It was a testament to their vibrant, unspoiled past. Then the narrative shifted, took a brutal, heartbreaking turn. The subsequent carvings grew sharper, more angular, the figures more agitated. He saw crude representations of what could only be humans. Stick figures with weapons, figures operating what looked like roaring machines tearing down trees. Flames licked at the edges of the forest. The gentle Bigfoot figures now appeared distressed, fleeing, their faces contorted in what Elias interpreted as fear and sorrow. One particularly poignant carving showed a large adult Bigfoot cradling a smaller, limp figure, surrounded by the chaos of fire and falling timber. Another depicted a single, isolated adult, its head bowed in what was unmistakably grief. while the human figures marched on, oblivious, destructive. Elias traced the lines with his finger, a cold dread seeping into his bones. The story unfolded before him, a silent, devastating chronicle of loss. The carvings didn't just depict events, they conveyed emotion, a deep, abiding sorrow etched into the very stone. He saw hunters, their primitive weapons starkly contrasting with the natural world. He saw logging machines, their destructive power rendered in harsh, jagged lines. He saw fire, consuming everything in its path. And repeatedly, he saw the tragic depiction of family members lost, separated, destroyed. It was a testament to a brutal reality, a silent accusation against the very species Elias belonged to. The profound sense of harmonious existence he had just witnessed in the glade was shattered by the story unfolding on the rock face, a testament to what had been. This was not merely history. It was a wound, still raw, still bleeding in the heart of this ancient family. The elder Bigfoot's sorrowful sounds hung heavy in the air, a deep, guttural lament that resonated not just in Elias's ears, but deep within his very bones. It was a sound devoid of aggression, yet brimming with an ancient, profound grief that needed no translation. The massive creature gestured again towards the rock carvings, its broad, scarred fingers tracing over the etched images of hunters with their crude weapons, then moving to the stylized representation of a fallen Bigfoot figure. The weight of that gesture, combined with the raw emotion in its vocalizations, solidified Elias's understanding with a chilling clarity. This wasn't merely a record of past events. It was a living, breathing testament to a catastrophic loss, a wound that had never truly healed. He watched, captivated and horrified, as the elder's hand then moved to another carving, depicting towering machines, their harsh, geometric forms starkly contrasted against the organic lines of the forest. These were logging machines, undoubtedly, devouring the very trees that formed their sanctuary, their home. The carved trees fell, and with them, the depiction of smaller Bigfoot figures scattering in terror, some never to be seen again. The elder emitted a series of soft, mournful whimpers, its head bowed slightly, a gesture that spoke volumes of despair. Elias's mind raced, piecing together the narrative from these silent, yet incredibly powerful images. He saw the systematic destruction of their habitat, the relentless pressure from human expansion pushing them further and further into dwindling pockets of wilderness. But the most devastating carvings were yet to come. The elder's finger paused over an image of flickering flames consuming the forest, and then, most heartbreakingly, a depiction of a mother Bigfoot cradling a smaller, lifeless form. Elias felt a cold dread spread through him, a dawning realization of the full horror they had endured. This wasn't just about territory or resources. It was about the brutal, often senseless loss of life, of family, of an entire way of being. The elder then raised its eyes to Elias, eyes that held an unfathomable depth of pain and resignation. In that gaze, Elias saw not just a plea for understanding, but a mirror reflecting the unchecked destructiveness of his own species. An overwhelming wave of guilt washed over Elias, so potent it threatened to buckle his knees. He, a human, stood there, a representative of the very species that had inflicted such unspeakable suffering upon these intelligent, sentient beings. His scientific detachment, his years of objective observation, shattered into a million pieces. He saw not just a cryptid, a myth brought to life, but a family. Beings with intricate social structures, deep emotional bonds, and an intrinsic right to exist peacefully in their ancient home. The sorrow radiating from the elder Bigfoot was palpable, a heavy cloak that enveloped them both, binding them in a shared moment of profound grief. He felt a deep, wrenching ache in his chest, a sickening awareness of humanity's casual cruelty, its insatiable hunger for progress at any cost. He had always considered himself an environmentalist, a protector of the wild, but now he saw the true, devastating scale of the damage, magnified by the personal tragedy of this family. These weren't mere animals surviving in the wild. They were beings with histories, with memories of loss, with a collective trauma burned into their very existence. The carvings weren't just art, they were a testimony, an indictment, a desperate cry from a people pushed to the brink of extinction. The elder Bigfoot, sensing Elias's profound emotional turmoil, moved closer, with a quiet grace that belied its immense size. Its large, calloused hand, the same hand that had left the imprint outside his tent, gently came to rest on his shoulder. It was a gesture of immense weight, both literally and figuratively. Elias flinched slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer power of the contact, the silent, ancient wisdom that seemed to flow from its touch. There was no aggression, no accusation, only a shared grief, an unspoken understanding that transcended language. In that moment, Elias felt a connection deeper than any he had ever experienced. It wasn't just empathy. It was a sharing of sorrow, a burden laid upon his own soul. He looked into the elder's eyes, seeing a reflection of his own shame and despair, and understood that this was not merely a lesson in natural history, but a profound revelation about the very core of humanity. The elder was not seeking vengeance, but understanding, a witness to their suffering. Its touch was a silent affirmation of their shared emotional landscape, a bridge built between two species across a chasm of misunderstanding and destruction. The weight of that hand on his shoulder anchored him to the present, to the raw, unfiltered reality of their shared existence. It was a silent dialogue, a communion of spirits. Elias felt an almost overwhelming urge to kneel, to offer some form of apology, some gesture of solace for the unimaginable pain his kind had inflicted. But he knew such actions would be meaningless. The elder simply stood there, its gaze unwavering, its hand a steady presence. It was a moment of profound intimacy, a silent pact formed in the heart of the ancient forest, forging an unbreakable bond between two disparate beings who had found common ground in the face of tragedy. The sheer intelligence, the capacity for such deep emotion from a creature so long relegated to myth, reshaped Elias's entire worldview, leaving him irrevocably changed. The heavy, silent weight of the elder Bigfoot's hand on his shoulder felt less like a physical touch and more like a profound spiritual transference. Elias understood, with a chilling clarity that settled deep into his bones, that the Bigfoot wasn't just showing him their past. They were showing him the true, devastating cost of human progress and ignorance. It wasn't merely a historical account of loss. It was a mirror reflecting humanity's darkest impulses, a disturbing revelation about the predatory nature that lay beneath the thin veneer of civilization. He saw his own species in a disturbing, entirely new light, stripped bare of its self-congratulatory narratives of advancement and superiority. He had always viewed humanity as capable of great good, of innovation, of compassion. Now, he saw the monstrous capacity for destruction, the casual disregard for other living beings, the insatiable greed that devoured forests and lives without a second thought. The carvings on the rock face, interpreted through the elder's sorrowful gaze and silent gestures, hadn't just depicted human actions. They had unveiled human character. The hunters weren't just seeking game. They were intruders, desecrators. The loggers weren't just harvesting timber. They were tearing apart homes, shattering families. The fires weren't just accidents. They were extensions of a careless, destructive force. This was the true Sasquatch revelation. Not that Bigfoot existed, but that humanity, in its relentless march, was the real beast of the wilderness, leaving a trail of sorrow and devastation in its wake. The elder eventually withdrew its hand, a silent signal that the lesson, the deeply painful truth, had been imparted. Elias stood there, rooted to the spot, a profound emptiness coiling in his gut. The glade, once a sanctuary of ancient wisdom and harmony, now felt heavy with the weight of unspeakable tragedies. He looked around at the peaceful, unsuspecting Bigfoot family members scattered throughout the verdant space, their very existence a fragile miracle in a world increasingly hostile to anything wild and untamed. How could he have been so blind, so naive, to the extent of human impact? His scientific curiosity, once a driving force, now felt tainted, a tool that could inadvertently lead to further destruction. He grappled with the immense secret and the crushing responsibility it carried. He was now privy to a truth so monumental, so world-altering, that it threatened to unravel everything he thought he knew. The urge to shout it from the rooftops, to expose the truth of these intelligent, emotional beings to the world, was powerful. He imagined the headlines, the scientific breakthroughs, the paradigm shift it would create. But then, the images of the carvings, the sorrow in the elder's eyes, flashed before him. He knew, with absolute certainty, that revealing their existence to the wider human world would be a death sentence, exposing them to further danger, exploitation, and inevitably, extinction. Humanity, in its current state, was not ready for such a revelation. It would hunt them, study them, cage them, or worse, destroy them out of fear or greed. The very act of proving their existence would be their undoing. A silent, unspoken agreement formed in the quiet of the forest. Elias looked at the elder Bigfoot, and the elder met his gaze, a deep, knowing understanding passing between them. There was no need for words. Elias made a solemn, silent vow to the Bigfoot family. He would protect their secret. He would carry this burden alone, a silent sentinel guarding their fragile existence. His mission would shift, subtly but irrevocably. He would advocate for the preservation of their habitat, for the protection of vast, untouched wilderness areas, but he would do so indirectly, without ever revealing their true nature, their profound intelligence, or the devastating history they had shared. His work would become a quiet crusade, leveraging his reputation as a wildlife photographer and cryptid enthusiast to champion conservation efforts, emphasizing the intrinsic value of wild spaces, not just for known species, but for the unknown, for the balance of ecosystems, for the very soul of the planet. He would become a voice for the voiceless, a subtle shield for those who could not speak for themselves. The vastness of the forest, once a playground for his adventurous spirit, now felt like a sacred trust. Every rustle of leaves, every distant call, would serve as a reminder of the secret he carried, a secret that had reshaped his very understanding of life, of purpose, and of humanity's place within the fragile tapestry of existence. The weight of this knowledge pressed on him, a heavy mantle, but within its burden lay a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet determination to right in his own small way the colossal wrongs depicted on that ancient rock face. He was no longer just an observer. He was a guardian, bound by a silent promise to a family found, and tragically, almost lost. Elias returned from that expedition a profoundly changed man. The subtle shift in his demeanor, noticeable even to his most casual acquaintances, though none could ever truly grasp the tectonic upheaval that had occurred within his soul. The vast, silent wilderness he had once approached, with the singular ambition of capturing photographic evidence of the elusive Bigfoot, now held a wholly different significance. His cameras, once instruments of pursuit, became tools of advocacy. His photographic work, once focused on the thrill of cryptid hunting, subtly but decisively shifted. He found himself drawn to dedicated wilderness conservation, his lens now highlighting the delicate ecosystems, the ancient trees, the pristine rivers, all the places where such profound life could still exist unmolested. He understood now that preserving the habitat was not just about saving trees or animals, but about safeguarding the secrets, the sacred spaces where the truly wild and wondrous could endure. His renewed understanding of nature's fragile balance was not merely academic. It was born from a searing, personal encounter. He saw the intricate web of life not as a detached observer, but as someone who had been granted a glimpse behind the veil, allowed to witness a hidden civilization fighting for its very survival. The vibrant green moss on an ancient redwood, the clear gurgle of a forest stream, the distant call of an owl. These were no longer just elements of a scenic landscape. They were components of a sanctuary, a last bastion against the relentless march of human expansion. He dedicated himself to environmental causes, not with the zeal of a newfound convert, but with the quiet, unwavering conviction of one burdened by a sacred trust. He published breathtaking images of untouched forests, wrote eloquent essays about the inherent value of wilderness, and lent his voice to campaigns against logging and resource extraction, always carefully avoiding any mention of the true motive behind his passion. He knew, with absolute certainty, that to speak of the Sasquatch family he had met would be to condemn them. Their continued existence depended on their anonymity, on the world's persistent disbelief. He often reflected on the devastating lesson learned in that hidden glade, a lesson etched into his very being. The most disturbing revelations, he concluded, were rarely about the monstrous other, but about the monster within ourselves. He had set out to uncover a myth, to prove the existence of a creature long relegated to folklore. Instead, the Bigfoot had shown him humanity's reflection, a species capable of unimaginable beauty and innovation, yet equally capable of staggering destruction and callous disregard for anything it deemed other. The Sasquatch revelation wasn't about a terrifying beast. It was about the chilling capacity for cruelty and ignorance residing in humanity's own heart. The true horror wasn't the unknown creature lurking in the shadows, but the all-too-known devastation wrought by human hands. He had learned that coexistence and respect for all life, in all its varied forms, were not merely idealistic aspirations, but paramount necessities for survival, not just for the unseen inhabitants of the forest, but for humanity itself. The elder Bigfoot had not shown him hatred, but sorrow, not anger, but a profound yearning for peace. That gesture of shared grief, the massive hand on his shoulder, became a permanent fixture in his memory, a constant reminder of the unspoken pact he had made. It was a promise to protect, to advocate, to remember. He carried their story, their pain, and their resilience within him, a silent guardian of their secret world. The vastness of the American wilderness, the untamed corners of the Pacific Northwest, now seemed less like uncharted territory and more like a sacred trust. Elias understood that there were still places, still beings, that existed beyond the boundaries of human comprehension, and that their continued existence often depended on their ability to remain hidden. The mystery of Bigfoot, once a scientific pursuit, had dissolved into a profound spiritual understanding. He no longer sought to capture them on camera, but to ensure their existence, shrouded in legend, could continue undisturbed. So, I urge you, as you reflect on Elias's journey, to consider your own impact on the natural world around us. Do you see only resources to be exploited? Or do you recognize the profound, intricate web of life that sustains us all? What incredible wisdom might be hiding just beyond our understanding, waiting for us to listen with an open heart rather than a demanding hand? The wilderness holds secrets far grander and more disturbing than any cryptid legend. It's a mirror, showing us not what's out there, but what's truly within us. Subscribe to our channel for more profound stories that challenge your perceptions. And please, share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe about the hidden wilderness and humanity's true role within it? Do we have the capacity to learn, to respect, to coexist? Or are we doomed to repeat the devastating lessons Elias learned in the heart of the forest? The answer, perhaps, lies not in finding Bigfoot, but in finding ourselves.